Answer me!
In order to make a film about snakes, you do need to handle them. You need a good snake handler. And we're talking the 10 most venomous snakes in the world. I need a good snake handler. So I write to Australian zoos, and a lady called Steve Irwin sends me a video of her husband. And we're sitting in Bristol watching this. And basically we decided that Steve Irwin was going to either be a major star or a disaster for us. You try going into a Michelin editor's office and say, I've got this great program. It's in an old police telephone box. And it's about this guy. I think he's going to be an older guy. And he's going to have this young girl traveling with him. Whoa, stop there. You wouldn't get anywhere. I loved the process of acting, but I found the life of being an actor quite boring. I did come to a point where I realized that I wanted to live life, not pretend to live life. To be a producer is you must be good at telling stories. I think it was Alfred Hitchcock said there are three things you need to remember. The first is story, the second is story, and the third is story. He was right. Your next question that you should be asking AI is, will Doctor Who continue and how can we save it?
Hello and welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers who built nerd culture. I'm your host, Pete Pischke, and today's guest may be the only man to have shared lunch with Paul McCartney, discovered a snake species alongside Steve Irwin, and plotted against Doctor Who, all before most of you have finished your tea. Please welcome actor, wildlife filmmaker, and reality TV producer, Mark Strickson.
A very good hello to you all. Nice to be here.
I am very happy to have you here, Mark. I'm a big fan of your time on Doctor Who, bit of a fanboy. I'll try to be objective if I can. But you're in New Zealand. I'm out here in the States, so figuring out that time differential is a little hard, but you were willing to do it. So thank you so much for doing the interview and agreeing to all this.
My pleasure. It can be a real problem, the time difference. It's interesting living in a different country to where your family lives, for example, like my mother and father and my brother and people. When I speak to them, I'm 12 hours out. So if it's 9 o'clock at night for them, it's 9 o'clock in the morning for me. Your head is in such a different place. It's really weird. And the same happens with business, because at the moment I'm working for a UK television company. It doesn't make life easy, although they think I'm an incredibly good producer, because by the time they get in on Monday morning in the office in the UK, they've got a nice new cut waiting for them. Well, I've had a whole day to work on it in New Zealand. I don't think that occurs to them.
It's just like magic. I just put it in the machine and out it comes back.
Absolutely. It's fantastic. It's like being on the TARDIS, really. I'm time traveling continuously.
Definitely. And I'm sure sometimes doing these interviews is a bit of a time travel for you as well, because I'm taking you all the way back to when you were just in your 20s.
Yeah. I can't say it feels like yesterday, but I'm lucky I've had an interesting and varied life. I've never been bored. So I'm very happy with how things went. Yeah. And people say, what do you feel about having been on Doctor Who? Would you do the job again if you had your time again? Absolutely. It was a fantastic job.
Yeah, for viewers who aren't familiar, Mark Strickson played the character of Turlough, one of the few male companions in Doctor Who. And on the show, you were there for about 2 years with Pete Davison, the fifth Doctor. And you were the kind of, is this character a good guy? Is this character a villain? I don't know. Very mysterious. A lot of fun. He's a very sarcastic character. A lot of the Doctor Who companions of the show are just like, you say, Doctor, you say jump and I say how high, and you're just kind of being this sarcastic, pouty guy. And I've always enjoyed it. I love the dynamic. It's so fun.
Yeah, when I cut into the series, the plot was that I was going to kill the Doctor. I had a controller called the Black Guardian, who I spoke to magically over space and time, and he was instructing me to kill the Doctor. I mean, this was quite interesting. It was a very strong way to come in, and so much so that I remember going shopping at the supermarket sort of the week after the first episode had aired, and children were shrinking away from me in the aisles. They were petrified on me, and talking to another ginger here, another ginger-haired person.
Yeah.
As you can see, it is the natural color of my hair. But I had my hair dyed very bright red for Doctor Who. the reason for that was because in long shot, my hair and Peter Davison, who played the Doctor, our hair doesn't look that different. So it was thought that the audience might confuse us, right? When the camera wasn't right in on us. And my hair goes much blonder in the summer, so it was even worse, right? I happened to start on the show in the summer. So they decided they'd dye my hair this bright copper red color, but that made me instantly identifiable. I looked like a punk rock figure. And everywhere I went, everybody knew it was me. And you've got to remember that at this point in time, Doctor Who was a very, very popular program. That the whole television landscape was very different. 12 to 14 million people tuned in on when Doctor Who was shown, when I was in it. I think we only had 4 television stations at the time in the UK. And the internet wasn't available. So it was a completely different, media landscape. So you were a massive star if you were on primetime television. And so everywhere I went, I was recognized. And yes, children ran screaming from me.
A lot of the things I've read about your time on the show is that the hair dye they used, I guess, I don't know if it was a shoddy work or something about it, but it just stuck to like everything.
Yeah. It did. I'm not saying the BBC was short of money, though. Yeah, very low budgets on Doctor Who at the time. But no, they promised me it would be a washout dye. It'd be absolutely fine. I have to say, the other alternative that John Nathan Turner, who was the producer, gave me was I'm going to have my hair dyed this metallic red or have all my hair cut off. So I'd be totally bald. And there was no way was I walking around like that for 2 or 3 years or however long I was going to do it.
That was so manipulative. That was so dastardly.
I know. So yeah, I think I said something like, "Well, you can cut my hair off if you want to, but I'll require loss of earnings payment for 6 months after I finish on the series." Now, mentioning money to the BBC at that time, that was like a red rag to a bull. No, I was going to have my hair dyed, right? So they did this with this washout dye, but it wasn't a washout dye at all. I had a red pillow for the next 2 years because it used to come out in the night. It used to come out on everything. I had a shower, it'd be running like blood around my body. It's like some awful insecticide.
Those years, the JNT years are pretty interesting, pretty wild time for Doctor Who. For people who don't understand, the Colin Baker years, they're kind of dark, more serious, and then JNT comes in. He's kind of like, I can save this show and make it for the cheap. And he comes in, and now it's Pete Davison, and he's more like a bro. He's got, he's just kind of one of the guys. He's not sarcastic, kind of like Tom Baker was, and it's just different. It's just different. But I mean, to give people an idea of Doctor Who back in the day in the 80s, right? Like if you were going to do a scene, or you just got the one take, you just got the one, and so it's either you nailed it or you did it.
It's not quite true that we only had one take. We often had many takes, but it was never because of the actors. As an actor, you only got one take, right? And that was part of one of the reasons I was employed on the series, which we'll come back to about how I got the job, right? But I was known at the BBC as an extremely reliable actor who arrived on time and knew their lines and delivered. And when we went into a studio, yes, we usually did things in one take. It was like the theatre. It was like live television almost. But it being Doctor Who, there were often all sorts of mechanical issues. Things not blowing up at the right time, things not falling over, the TARDIS not shaking, all those sorts of things. And technically, things did quite often go wrong for nobody's fault. It was quite hard stuff to do, particularly at that time. And so we'd often have to do 3 or 4 takes because something technically went wrong. But we were expected to give exactly the same performance every time and to get it right. And this was really, really stressful, particularly for visiting actors coming into the series. They couldn't believe how fast we were working in the studio. And I do remember one actor, he broke down in tears. He just couldn't cope with the stress of it. And I'd been in a soap opera before joining Doctor Who, so I was used to pretty fast studios. But I must admit, the first time I came to a studio before I started on the series and saw Peter and Janet and Sarah, I was amazed how fast they were working. So yeah, it was hold on to your hats, guys. Here we go.
Yeah, before you did Doctor Who, I think you were on the show Angel, and actually, you had been acting since you were a teenager. You had gone to.
I've been acting since I was a child, but on and off. My first here's a story you may not know. My first appearance was Almost Nude with Judi Dench. And if you look at shots of a film of A Midsummer Night's Dream, a Shakespeare play, directed by the film was directed by Peter Hall, and it starred Judi Dench when she was very young. She has hardly any clothes on as well, just a couple of few ivy leaves strategically placed, and an actor called Ian Richardson, who people will probably have heard of. I was in the local church choir, and they wanted some boys to play fairies who could sing. And so I was one of the fairies. I was one of Titania, the fairy queen's fairies. And that was my first performance. You can see me singing. And I had another makeup disaster, really, because we were covered in green paint from head to toe. We were totally green, and we had a fir cone strategically placed in our nether regions. So that was it. That was my first ever appearance as an actor. I then gave up acting for many years. I think I was about 8 at the time.
Wow, what a way to start! That a little.
Starting yes to Judi Dench isn't bad, is it?
That's funny.
If you go on the web, you can find that film, and you'll find some shots, and you may even, I don't know if you'll recognize me, but I'm definitely in.
I'm a little hesitant though. Something called Almost Nude. I'm. That seems like something like that. I'm not sure I'm going to Google that.
I wouldn't Google Mark Strickson Almost Nude because you'll get something from Doctor Who, I'm sure. Oh no, let me tell you, if we're going down the racy stories route, after I left Doctor Who, I did a play for Channel 4 called Looking Back, and it was about a young couple whose marriage was breaking up, and they went on a holiday on a boat on the canals in England with the wife's parents, who were at the age in their early 70s, just starting to rediscover their relationship again. It was quite an interesting film. But in that, I had my first and only sex scene. And people talk about sex scenes. Well, in this case, because we were on a boat, the cameraman had his tripod between my legs. So they were only shooting the top half of us naked. So it was so cramped. The cameraman was actually on the bed with the tripod between my legs.
Oh, let's see if I can make this even more awkward.
Exactly. It's quite a good film. On the first scene of that, I had to walk down into the boat, and the camera was underneath, and I walked down and through a hatch and into the boat. And we did the first scene. And the director said, Mark, has anybody ever told you, you are really frightening on camera. You have the clearest blue eyes I've ever seen. And I guess that's why another reason I got the part in Doctor Who, because that's what they wanted from Turlough. They wanted this slightly alien, but potentially quite aggressive, but not necessarily. And so was I typecast? Well, it is the sort of character I play well. So yeah, I guess so.
Well, you're fighting against that anti-ginger bias, of course.
Well, I mean, we all know ginger hair people can't be trusted, so there's another good reason.
You were pretty gutsy when you first started with Doctor Who. I think one of the usual stories that comes up with your name is that you showed up and met with JNT a day early, like prior to the auditions.
Oh no, I met up with JNT a long time before I appeared on Doctor Who. This is a story I'm now allowed to tell because Julia Smith, who was the producer of EastEnders, which is a very popular BBC soap, right? Before that, she was producing the soap opera that I was in called Angels. It was set in Birmingham. I played a gloomy taxi driver with an accent of that. An ambulance driver, not a taxi driver, ambulance driver, because it was a fantastic job for a young actor. It was my first job on telly, second. And it involved lots of nurses in a hospital in Birmingham. And so, I'm 22 And there I am with all these gorgeous women to go to work with every day, all these fantastically lovely looking nurses. It was amazing. And it was all filmed in Birmingham. And what happened was the guy who was playing the lead role in the soap opera I was in, Angels, became ill. And the producer, Julia Smith, and her writer, a guy called Tony Holland, rewrote it with me coming in as the lead in the soap opera. But they didn't ask me. They didn't ask me if this was okay. It was handed to me as a fait accompli. And so I rang my agent and said to my agent, look, Jan, they just offered me the lead on Angels. And I'm not sure I want to do it. I mean, it wasn't, I thought Angels was fine, but it just wasn't really, I don't know, you're born in Stratford-upon-Avon, and you spend your time going to the Royal Shakespeare Theatre, you train at RADA. Even the lead in you might think it's quite snobbish, but even being the lead in a soap opera, it's not something you immediately want to do. You have sort of other aspirations, I think, particularly when you're young. And so I said, Chad, what else am I up for? And she said, well, it's difficult. She said, you're up for a couple of things. One was a guest role in a detective series. And the other was the role on Doctor Who. And so I said, well, can I audition for them? But, audition, I said, but particularly the Doctor Who role, because it was another regular role, regular money. Can I audition for that before I accept the job with Angels? She said, I don't think that's going to be possible. They're not auditioning for 5 or 6 weeks from now. And so I said, well, who's the producer? And so she said, well, it's produced by a guy called John Nathan Turner. Okay. So I find out I've got a BBC pass. I can get in any BBC building because I'm working on the soap opera, right? I've got a swipe that gets me through. So I found out where John was working, where the Doctor Who office was, a place called Threshold House in Shepherd's Bush in London, and I went and knocked on the door. And I said, hi, you don't know me. My name's Mark Strickson, but I'm apparently down as one of the people who are going to audition for a part on Doctor Who in a few weeks' time. But I've been offered another part that would take me out from that. And it was a lady called Jane Judge, who was John's secretary. And she said, well, you better come in and sit down. So she disappeared and went into John's office, shut the door. And John came out and said, Mark, nice to meet you. Come in. And he said, well, tell me what's going on. So I said, well, I'd been offered the lead in Angels. I'm not sure if I want to do it. To be honest, I think I'd rather do Doctor Who, but I know you're not auditioning for a time. He said, well, you better have a read of the script. And he got Eric Sayward in, who was the script editor. And I read the script and they had a little chat between themselves. And John, in the end, turned to me and said, Mark, we think you're absolutely right for the part. You've got it. You're not allowed to tell anybody except your agent. Because he said, we are a public company, the BBC, and we have to be seen to be fair and just. We are going to audition for this part, but you've got the job. So it was amazing. On the same day, I went for the guest role in the detective series Juliet Bravo and got that job. And my agent said to me, Mark, I suggest you remember this day for the rest of your life. You will never, ever again be offered 3 good jobs in one day. And she was absolutely right.
Wow.
So that's how it works out. I mean, it does work. It all comes out in the wash. Some of the people who auditioned for the part I met while I was working on the series, because it's one way of auditioning for regular parts is to find other young actors who can play other parts in Doctor Who. It's a double whammy, so to speak. So I don't think anybody had to feel too bad about it, but amazing.
That was amazing. That was a very gutsy thing. It makes sense that happened in your 20s. I'm not sure now. I'm like 35 now. I'm like, I don't know if I would second, because you know what? I have a good thing going here.
Well, I had nothing to lose. I had nothing to lose, really. I mean, I could have taken the job on the soap opera, but I really more wanted to do the thing on Doctor Who. But as I say, it turned out partly, I think. I mean, I know that it was that John, the producer of Doctor Who, and Julia Smith, the producer of Angels and then EastEnders, had this sort of long-running feud. They didn't get on very well together. So I don't know if John felt that, oh God, I could steal Mark off Julia. I don't know.
Were you aware of the rivalship at the time?
No, no, no. It's something I heard about much later.
Oh, okay, so you kind of lucked in there.
I kind of liked him. But interestingly enough, Gary Downey, who was John's partner, John F. Turner's partner, he'd worked as a production manager on Angels and had worked with me and knew that I turned up on time, didn't knock furniture over, and knew my lines. And John was working so fast on Doctor Who. I think having that sort of reference was excellent. Yeah, for me, I was just the right person in right place, right time.
Well, I think you're like one of my favorite. Not you. You're not ex Turlough. Things are getting very confused. The interview starts going that direction. I was gonna say the character you play is one of my favorite classic companions. I think he's such a great, unique dynamic in that show, and he's just such a memorable character that even with your return on like Big Finish and stuff, you know, it's just a great character. It's a great setup. You had a great time on the show. One of the things I was reading about you when you're working on the 5 Doctors, so that was one of the big anniversary specials for those who aren't classic Doctor Who fans. And that was they were doing a lot of that, not at the BBC, not a studio, but they were recording a lot of that like out on location. And I think you have a story about that.
Yeah. No, what happened was we filmed. The first scenes in the film are the Doctor landing in the TARDIS on a remote mountain in Wales. And there are some various scenes up there with us. And so we went to Wales and we filmed those first. And there was a lot of other filming to be done in the area, which didn't involve me. And so I went on holiday with my wife at the time, Julie Brennan. And we went on holiday in our old VW Beetle, orange VW Beetle, and stayed at bed and breakfast and things. And it was lovely. It was really nice. And I came back through Stratford upon Avon, where my great aunt Violet and my grandmother lived, and I went to their flat. And my great aunt Violet met me at the door. She said, "Mark, but the BBC wants you. The BBC wants you. It's been on the local radio. It's been everywhere. They can't contact you. They need you urgently." Right. And so what had happened was we filmed all of our location sequences on film at the time. And film cameras are very simple cameras. Film goes on a clockwork mechanism through an exposure plate, and that's what records the picture. Now that's called the gate of the camera. That gate has to be checked after every take, right? Because it can get dust in it, it can get hairs in it, right? The most common thing is a hair on the gate. And so what had happened was they checked it, but hadn't noticed there had been a hair on the gate. So what it was there was a line across all the shots in one scene. So they needed to record the scene again. So they were trying to get me to bring me back to Wales, but that's how different times were. There were no mobile phones. There was no internet. So they had to wait until I eventually turned up somewhere. And so they'd rung all my family. I rang any of my family. They had to tell the BBC immediately. So I went back to Wales and recorded those scenes again. But it's just a marker of how different life was in those days.
I can't imagine what the public, if they're hearing about actor gone missing on the radio.
But the radio didn't work in our car. So we didn't know the radio on. In fact, there were holes in the floor. I had to wear walking boots because it was so cold driving that car. There you go.
Nice.
We didn't get paid a lot either. There's another thing. Actors these days get paid substantially more than we used to get paid in the old days. It wasn't special being an actor financially, I can tell you.
Yeah, you were just on the show 2 years. Your time was relatively short. You clocked out just right before the last Fifth Doctor story.
Yeah.
What was your reasoning at the time for like, okay, I've had my time here, I want to do something else, or what was going on?
Again, it's part of being young. I thought, gosh, there's lots of other things to do in life. And I felt that Turlough as a character, he came in very strongly. He actually went out very strongly as well. But it was very difficult to sustain the character. When you've got long-running regular characters, it's hard. We were making half-hour episodes, 4 half-hour episodes. And once you've got that, you've got the doctor, you've got an assistant, or maybe 2 or 3 assistants. You've got the baddie of the week, so to speak, the baddie within the story, and another couple of strong characters there. It's very, very hard for writers to be able to write for everybody within that. Somebody always has to take a step back. Now, Turlough was, one, he was male, and the doctor was male at the time, Peter Davison, right? So he had one lead male in it. He didn't want to really take out the female assistant role. That needed to be quite strong in there, right? Got to remember, this is family programming, so something for the boys, something for the girls, something for mum, something for dad, right? Turlough was a very, very difficult character. He was so strong and so independent. He was very, very difficult to write for within that half-hour format because he was strong and took control of wherever he was. And that's the doctor's role. It's not the assistant's role. The assistant's role is partly to ask, Doctor, where are we now? Doctor, what are we going to do? Right? All those sorts of questions to help move the plot on. That's why Doctor Who is easiest to write for when you have either a male or female doctor and an assistant of the opposite sex. That is how it works best. When I joined Doctor Who, there had been 3 people in the TARDIS, Adric, and Tegan and Nyssa, so 1 guy and 2 girls. None of them were really getting a good part. And so soon after I came into it, Nyssa left, and then it was just me and Janet, and that was all right because Janet could stay with the Doctor and I could go off and have my own plot lines. But it wasn't going to go on forever, and I felt my plot lines were getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And I sympathized with it because I could see how difficult it was to write for another strong character. So I decided to leave. I asked Eric, the script editor, to take me out on a bang, a nice, good, strong story, and that would be enough for me. Absolute madness. You only do that at 23, 24 when you're a young actor because it was regular money. I bought my first house. I was very stupid things to do. I should have done it for another 10 years.
Artistically, I think you're right because I think he has a clean arc.
Yeah.
And that's kind of part of the mainstay of why he's still such a good character. Did you ever get a sense, though, what might have happened if you had stayed on? Do you think you would have done well, like when they flipped over to Colin Baker? Would you have stuck around with Perry? What do you think would have happened?
I don't know. I mean, I get on very well with Nicola. Colin's a lovely guy. So same as when I was on Doctor Who, people say, so how is it working? How are Peter, Janet, and Sarah to work with? The answer is they're all really nice people. And I used to enjoy going into work because it's like going into an office. If you like the people you work with, then it's nice to go in the morning and have a coffee and whatever, right? And if you work with horrible people, it's not. So I think I'd have been as happy as I was when I was with Peter, with Colin and Nicola. But I don't know where. Turlough wasn't going anywhere. Turlough needed to fly off into the sunset. It'd be nice if he came back. I'm not saying I don't want to come back. I'm glad I wasn't killed.
If somehow Doctor Who manages to survive the current situation with Disney,
Yes.
and they just call you up, hey, you wanna show up with whoever the 16th Doctor is? Maybe it's Billy Piper. I don't know. You would take that. You'd be like, yes, I do like money.
Yeah. They get paid better now, so yeah, I'm sure I would say yes. And I do have a proper job as a TV producer, so I have to work it around that. But yeah.
That's a good jumping off point because what's interesting about you is you've worn several different hats and you've had big impact in different parts of your career in different paths. So you did acting for a while, and I think when you were like 30, you decided, okay, I want to study zoology. That's what I'm going to do.
No, it wasn't quite like that. It was a decision. I mean, I worked almost until I left the UK. So I explained that I studied zoology in Australia. Why did I go to Australia? Well, why did I study zoology? I had I've become more and more worried about the state of the planet. I was, in a sense, before my time. But I was very, very worried about the environment and what we were doing as humans to it. and I was very worried about what was happening to the natural world. So I thought, right, I'm in television. I'd quite like to make natural history films, natural history documentaries, but I don't know enough about the subject to start doing that just from nowhere. And who would employ me? And I did have a little bit of money in the bank, and so my wife and I both decided to emigrate to Australia. Well, we both went to university at the age of 30 odd. And why did we go to Australia? Well, we'd had 3 appalling summers in the UK. We'd had the war against Argentina and the Margaret Thatcher years, which I wasn't very happy with the politics in the UK. So we decided we'd go somewhere where we knew the sun shone, and that was Australia. We'd never been there, but when we flew in on the plane to Sydney, the sky was blue, the sea was sparkling blue beneath us. It was just like it was in the brochure, so to speak. And it was right. I mean, Australia does have a most wonderful climate. So yeah, we both studied zoology. I should explain that my first wife was an actress as well. She was a regular on a soap opera called Emmerdale Farm in the UK. And she does appear in Doctor Who in a 4-parter called Paradise Towers with Sylvester McCoy. But we both decided we'd do zoology, which we did for the next 4 years. She is still 40 years later at the same university, has got her doctorate and teaches there. I went off and did other things. But yeah.
You became a documentarian.
I did. Yeah, I did. And that was quite interesting. Well, actually, my first marriage broke up, but I realized when I finished my degree that the center, well, I didn't realize it, I knew it, the center of the world for making natural history documentaries was Bristol, and is, in a sense, Bristol. It's where the BBC Natural History Unit is. David Attenborough and all that, right? And if you do want to make natural history programs, it's a good place to start. So I moved back to the UK after 4.5 years in Australia and went to live in Bristol. And I sat and wrote some films, and I sent them off to producers and development producers in companies in Bristol. There were quite a lot of companies making natural history films then. It was a boom time. Discovery was just starting. National Geographic Channel was just starting. So suddenly the face of television was changing. And I sent them off to one of the companies was a company called Partridge Films, and a chap called Andrew Buchanan was head of development there. And I had a phone call from Andrew, and Andrew said, I know this is going to sound like a silly question, but you're not the Mark Strickson of Doctor Who, are you? And I said, yes, I am, Andrew. And he said, well, you probably don't remember, but I'm Andrew Buchanan, and I was a production manager on one of your last episodes. And he said, and since then, I've changed my career, and I'm now development producer at a natural history company. And so by a very, very weird thing, I got invited into Partridge Films and met Andrew and the executive producer, Mike Rosenberg, who ran the company, and they liked 2 of my films. And again, right place, right time. It was a boom time in natural history program making, and nobody in the UK had really made any films about Australia. It was just too far away. It's the other side of the world. There was nobody there who knew about the nature of Australia. By this point, I'd worked as a ranger for the Australian National Park Service. I knew my stuff, and I had loads of contacts in the science world, in zoology, in Australia. So who better? And in development, they had a film about poisonous snakes, and I knew that the 10 deadliest snakes in the world were in Australia. So this became a film called The 10 Deadliest Snakes in the World. And it is an historic film across the world. It changed the face of documentary making, and natural history documentary making in particular. Again, right place, right time. It was all about deadly snakes. Now, if you get a camera out in front of a snake and it's not enclosed in a set, it just goes away from you. Snakes don't want anything to do with humans. They just go away from you. in order to make a film about snakes, you do need to handle them, and you need a good snake handler. And we're talking the 10 most venomous snakes in the world. I need a good snake handler. So I write to Australian zoos and reptile parks or whatever. And this little place called Beerwah, north of Brisbane, has got this tiny little reptile park, right? And a lady called Terry Irwin sends me a video of her husband, Steve Irwin. And it's okay. He shouts a lot in it, but it's okay. He's definitely got something. And we're sitting in Bristol watching this. And basically we decided that Steve Irwin was going to either be a major star or a disaster for us. There was nothing in between, right? So we hired Steve Irwin, and I went out and directed the film, and the 10 Deadliest Snakes in the world was made. It was a huge issue persuading Discovery Channel not to subtitle it because they didn't think anybody would understand Steve. And he went on through their biggest star.
That's funny.
I had a huge battle to stop that happening because I realized that it's this.
No one can understand those Australians. It's impossible.
It's impossible. But well, yeah, you can't understand New Zealanders. I now live in New Zealand. I do have difficulty here sometimes. But Australia, and Steve was wonderful. And it was massively popular. It was a huge hit. But there were two other very interesting things about that film. Previous to that, most documentaries were shot on film. It was one of the first times you'd ever use a video camera, a digibeta video camera, digital beta camera, right? This was an extremely expensive camera at the time, right? And there weren't many of them. And it meant you could follow the person. You could film half an hour, but not use half an hour. You could have it on start, right? And it would automatically film the previous 12 seconds, and then you press start. But it would have a memory. It had a memory that recorded 12 seconds where you hadn't pressed the start button, right? Okay, so it was always recording 12 seconds previous. Now, imagine when you're filming things like eggs hatching, snakes attacking things, right? Anything like that. This is absolutely wonderful, right? Because it happens very fast. So we made this film absolutely. We did a 4-month pure natural history shoot, and I still see some of the snake footage we filmed in documentaries now. So we did a marvelous natural history shoot. Steve was very good as a presenter. It rated its socks off. I mean, people loved it across the world, right? But the other thing we did was, when I got back to the UK, my executive producer said, "This is incompetent. We're up for a reshoot. Have you never heard of a tripod, Mark?" What we'd done is we'd ran with the camera. We'd chased Steve, right? We'd taken the camera off the tripod. Now, believe it or not, this had hardly been done before in documentary television. It was always on a tripod. So it gave it a sense of immediacy that people had never, ever seen before. And that was the cameraman's decision, which I had to agree with as the director. But I didn't realize it was so revolutionary. But as I say, I went back to the UK and I was pretty much given the sack because I had been incompetent and not kept the camera on a tripod. It was shaky. But of course it was. We were running through the Australian bush following snakes. And then, as well, by taking it off the tripod, there's a golden rule when you film animals. If anybody wants to film animals, here's your golden rule. You must be at the eye level of the animal. That's when it works, right? Now, snakes are on the ground. If you want to be on the ground, your camera's got to be on the... If you want to film snakes, your camera has to be on the ground. So you need a brave cameraman because snakes like to, when they're feeling a bit threatened, go for a hide in a dark hole. Or to them, the camera lens looks like a dark hole. It's the first thing they make straight for. So the snakes would go towards it and they'd climb over the camera and escape. So if you're talking the 10 most venomous snakes in the world we're working with, this is hard shit. But it was a fabulous film. When I became a name director overnight once it was aired. So yeah. And I made quite a few films.
It wasn't that long that Steve Irwin, he became a household name.
He became a household name, yeah. He was Animal Planet when Animal Planet started. Yeah, absolutely. So talk about right place, right time, right technology. It all just came together on that one film. And when it aired in the UK, Channel 4, it aired, there are only 4 channels. Channel 5 was in existence. Oh no, Channel 5 just was in existence. And Channel 5 was known as a man's channel, right? And so they were showing England. They'd somehow got the rights to show England in a soccer game, right? So every man in the country was watching that. And everybody else watched ITV, which is our Channel 3, an independent station, right? Which had the Steve Irwin film on. And the headline in the papers the next day was Black Wednesday for the BBC. It was the day on which the BBC had its lowest ratings since it had ever been in existence. So there you go. That's how important 10 Deadliest Snakes in the World was with Steve Irwin. It was a groundbreaking film.
I feel, poor, Steve Irwin, I'm thinking that your thing comes out in 98. Irwin dies in 2006.
Yeah.
That's just 8 years.
Yeah, he's on the same age as me.
I guess I had never made that connection. His time, I mean, he was a huge star.
Absolutely.
I don't want to make things too morbid, but do you remember your feelings or what was going on when you heard about his passing?
No, exactly what I was doing. I was sitting in an edit room in New Zealand, right, when he died, and I was run by Reuters, the news company, and they said, "Do you know Steve Irwin's died?" And I said, "If I could have $100 every time somebody's told me that, I'd be a rich man. You'd have to prove it to me." So I said, "So there's a gun on the Reuters news site," and it obviously was a Reuters thing. And I was due to leave for a shoot in Indonesia that day, that afternoon, fly out of the city I live in. And so they said, "Can we have an interview with you, Mark?" And I said, "Yeah, but I'm warning you, I'm leaving for the airport at 3:00. And this was sort of like 10:30 in the morning when they rang. And they said, we'll get a crew to you. And they did. They got a Reuters crew to me by about 1:00, and I did an interview. And I got to the airport, and the guy at the airport says, "Excuse me," he says, "You aren't the guy who was on the television at lunchtime talking about Steve Irwin." I said, yeah, I was, yeah. But I was, obviously extremely upset by his death. As I say, that whole thing about being exactly the same age, that made it hit even harder. And I have almost died since then. Being close to death does take your, yeah. I'll tell you how I almost died if you want to, but because I probably have. I mean, I've almost been killed by crocodiles twice, but that's another story. But how I almost died, I'll tell you about that as well. But how I almost died was I got off a plane. I'd been traveling insanely, traveling to the UK, over to America. I traveled far too fast, far too quickly, not looking after myself, and I got a blood clot in my leg. And my son was about 3 at the time, and we went away for the Christmas break, and I was halfway up a hill. I was carrying him on my back up to a astronomy point where there was a big telescope, and I thought I had a heart attack. I felt like I had a heart attack, and I fell to the ground. And I got back to the car, and I said to my wife, "Can you drive me very slowly to your parents," which was a couple of hours away. And I didn't panic. I breathed very slowly. I thought I'd had a heart attack, but the nearest hospital was another 2 hours on, right? And I could have organized for a helicopter, but I took some aspirin. I knew that was a good thing to do if you had heart problems, thins your blood. And we drove very slowly back to Dunedin, which is the city I live in. And I got to the hospital, by which time I was doubled over with pain. And they tested me immediately. I mean, I was taken straight in on a stretcher. And they tested me immediately for a heart attack. I hadn't had a heart attack. And the next thing the doctor said to me was, "Have you been on a long flight recently?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, Christ, I know exactly what you've got." I had a pulmonary embolism. I had a blood clot in my lungs. Apparently, I was 4 hours away from death when I got to the hospital. If I hadn't got to a hospital, and this is a thing that also is very close to my experience in life. I had a friend who died from apparently a heart attack in the Brazil jungle. I don't think it was a heart attack. He was an incredibly fit man. I think he probably had a pulmonary embolism like me after the long flight there. Mine was about 5-6 days later. He'd gone off into the jungle. There's no hospitals in the jungle. If I'd been in the jungle, it would have been reported that I'd had a heart attack. So you have to be very, very careful. A lot of people who do natural history films and go to remote locations have their appendix removed because they can't take the risk of having appendicitis. And you don't need your appendix, so they have it removed to avoid the risk of that.
Huh.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Blood clots are scary. Embolisms, aneurysms. Ugh.
Yeah, absolutely horrible. So, how was I killed by crocodiles almost twice? Right. This was with Steve Irwin. Another Steve Irwin story for you. Another Steve Irwin story for you. Killed by crocodiles. Yes. Well, Steve taught me a lot about working with animals and working very closely to animals. And we made a film called Crocs Down Under. Crocs in Australia. And we were trying to get a female crocodile. It was on purely a natural history shoot. Steve wasn't there. And we were trying to get shots of a crocodile coming back to its nest. When the eggs hatch for a crocodile, the little ones make a noise. And the female crocodile, that noise brings her back to the nest. And she helps. The nest is a huge mound of earth. And she digs them out and helps them to the water. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's quite sweet, really. We, for some reason, this female crocodile that we knew her eggs were about to hatch would not go back to the nest, and she was steering clear of the nest. We were sure it was to do something to do with the fact that she could maybe smell us. We had mosquito repellent on. I mean, you're going to get malaria or dengue fever if you don't have mosquito repellent on in a swamp we're right at the top of north of Australia, in a very, very remote place. And so we decided, right, we'd pitch a tent and not wear repellent. But we'd have to be in the tent, right? Leave the camera out where we could film from it and only go out when she come back to the nest and was doing the thing of taking her young out. Anyway, this didn't work. But what did happen one night was that another crocodile didn't see us and crawled on top of the tent. So there were two of us in a tent with a crocodile on top. Unfortunately, they're very large, these crocodiles. They're only 20 foot long, right? So fortunately, the crocodile went away from us, right? But then, I mean, obviously, we were absolutely panic-stricken, right? We cut our way out of the tent, right? Grabbed the camera and walked through the marsh in the dark, right? About 40 meters back to where our vehicle was. Now, this was a crocodile-infested swamp, right? And then after that, we went back to the floor of the house we were staying in. It was a completely open shed, right? It was in an Aboriginal settlement in the north. And we just slept on the floor of it. And we went back there and we drank beer for 3 days and pretty well waited until we'd stopped shaking. So that was the first time I was killed by a crocodile. Second time was much more serious. I'd left my crew at the end of a billabong, a small lake, in a very remote part of Australia again. And what happened was a whole lot of birds came and I saw them fly around the corner to the other end of the billabong. And I thought, there must be lots of lovely birds around there. That would make a lovely shot, right? So I said to the guys, I'll go and check it out. Now, you do not do this, right? It was stupidity, right? You do not walk in the middle of nowhere in Australia on your own next to water where there are lots of crocodiles. Just don't do it, right? And so on the way to the end of the billabong, there was a lizard's nest that had been dug out in the bank of the billabong in the sand. So I went to have a look at it, and there were some broken eggs in it and things. And at that point, a crocodile launched itself out of the water straight at me. A massive female crocodile. And what I had learned from Steve, who knew a lot about working with crocodiles, was that if you are in crocodile country, you don't walk anywhere unless you've got a big hollow bamboo stick with you. So your 6 foot long bamboo stick, hollow. And why would you want that? Well, when crocodiles fight, they bang their heads against each other. So if a big crocodile, its head hits a smaller crocodile, the reverberation from the head, because a lot of the head's hollow, it makes a bigger noise. Like the bigger the drum, the bigger the noise. So the little crocodile knows, this is a big crocodile. I'll shove off. I'm getting out of here because I'm going to lose this fight. It's just a very, very basic instinct in them. It's how they know how strong the crocodile they're facing up against is, right? So the theory is, if you hit the crocodile on the head with something that makes a very big, loud, hollow noise, like like a hollow bamboo pole, the crocodile will back off because it thinks you're a big crocodile. And you can just walk slowly away from the crocodile, holding onto your bamboo stick, right? So I did this. I hit the crocodile. The crocodile was there in front of me, coming at me, attacking me. Right? I hit it with the bamboo stick, and thank you, Mr. Irwin, you saved my life. It worked. The crocodile stopped dead in its tracks, and I walked backwards as Steve had instructed me to. And I walked backwards, and the crocodile didn't move. And eventually, I turned around and went back to the Jeep again. I spent another 3 days on the floor drinking beer and shaking my nerves.
Oh my goodness, that's very good. That crocodile believed in the stick thing. That reminds me of the Boy Scouts where they have some kind of myth about like if you encounter bears, have bells with you. It's like I'm not sure this is gonna work, guys.
If you ever go to the north of Australia and you want to save your life, you want people to help you, take lots of beer with you. Whenever we flew in, the plane was mostly full of beer because, of course, they can't get it up there, right? So it's worth more than gold, really. I mean, beer is liquid gold if you're in the North of Australia, or was at the time, right? Because I got back after that shoot to the UK. I was still working for this UK company, and the production manager had a fit. She said, "Look at this beer bill. You've spent thousands. You spent over $10,000 on beer, Mark." I said, "If I hadn't spent over $10,000 on beer, Sue, you'd have a bill for $40,000 there, not $12,000. Beer is the currency in the North of Australia. That's why I spent all that money on beer."
That is a really interesting. You could have a documentary about animal documentary making. That is a fascinating field.
So this brings me sort of back to why I left Doctor Who. Right? I have had a very exciting life, interesting life. Some of it's been exciting, some of it's been dead boring. But I've had a very interesting life, and I traveled all over the world, and I've been to incredibly remote places. I spent 6 months living on an island and filming flying crocodiles in the most remote place in the world, probably the Western Islands off Irian Jaya in Indonesia. I've spent time filming Komodo dragons on my own on an island with a cameraman. So I had an extraordinary life in those, and the things I've seen have been amazing. And I did sort of realize that the BBC rehearsal rooms was on a traffic island in West London. It wasn't a wonderfully great place to go to work, and that's where you go to work if you're working for the BBC. For 8-9 months a year, I was on a traffic island in West London. Well, I did come to a point where I realized that I wanted to live life, not pretend to live life. And for some people, acting is an adventure, and they find it an adventure. I didn't. I did find it boring. I loved the process of acting, but I found the life of being an actor quite boring. And that is a major reason why at 29, 30, I left the UK. I set off to have an adventure. I didn't know what adventure that would be, but I had an adventure. Still going on there.
You sure did. That was quite a profound observation to make, especially for someone in their 20s.
Yeah.
And what you're doing right now, you're a TV producer, but not TV as in animal documentaries.
Well, no. I'd have probably had to have stayed in Bristol if I wanted to do that. And my life took me to Australia, and eventually I actually got sent out to New Zealand to work on a thing for Animal Planet, and I met my current wife in New Zealand. This is why you find me in New Zealand, and I have a 16-year-old boy. So he's been at school. So I've earned a living out in New Zealand. And I have done some natural history. For example, I did a series called Modern Dinosaurs, which was about animals that live in New Zealand that are directly related to dinosaurs. Oh, that was really interesting. So I do some natural history. I did a show on volcanoes for the Smithsonian Channel. That was it. That was really interesting. But the same company that I made the volcano program for, we're doing a program called Rich House, Poor House, which is a rich family swaps with a poor family. It's actually a very, very clever concept. It has a serious side to it. If you went into a commissioning editor's office and you said, "I want to make a program about people who are poor," you wouldn't be seeing the light of day. People don't want to watch people struggling and suffering, and we have enough of that on the news. It certainly doesn't what It's not what people want to watch at 8:30 at night, having seen the news and everything. You don't need to be reminded how difficult life is. But what Rich House Poor House is they change lives for a week and they change spending budgets, right? And why it's such a good program, and it's been going for 5 or 6 years now, is because most people don't realize how poor people are. Until somebody's got a budget of $4,000 spending money for the week, swaps places with somebody who's got $140 spending money for the week and 2 kids, they don't realize what that's like. And they truly have to live it in this program. There is no way out. The rich people have to live on that money. And it's a real eye-opener into how difficult people's lives are. Meantime, it's lightened by the fact that the poor family's got loads of money and they do loads of treats and they do things that and that lightens the program up. The other thing that makes it interesting is you go to 2 people's houses and you nose about in their lives. Audiences love that. They love going in and nosing around people's lives. So it's got that entertainment bit, but it has got this extremely serious side to it. It doesn't come across as serious, and you only sort of realize it's been there at the end of the program. And at the end of the program, if I don't make the audience cry, I have not done my job. You should have a tear in your eye at the end of the program, because of course people have to go back to their lives, and that's very difficult sometimes. But we do also make a program called Rich House Poor House Changed My Life, because it's also about the rich people helping the poor people. We try and match people. So maybe the rich people own a chain of hotels, the poor people, the guy's a chef or something like that, but he trained as a chef and now he's a bus driver or something, but we try and make them come up with a business idea that could work for the poor people. And sometimes it has spectacularly worked. And those poor people 2 years later have been very wealthy, running a very profitable business. So we do also do that one, Rich House Poor House Changed My Life. We also make a rather fun program called Rich Holiday, Poor Holiday, which is rich people having the holiday poor people have and poor people having the holiday rich people have, which is just very funny sometimes.
I'd volunteer for that one. Oh, you want to take me? You will put me on the what holiday? Yes, please.
So that's what I do now. And it's shot. The company's currently making it for Netflix in America, and I'm one of the people who makes the version for Channel 5 in the UK, all shot in the UK with UK crews. All the footage is sent to me in New Zealand, and pretty much I put a story together, because you're using hundreds of hours of material, many tens of hours, 90 to 100 hours of material. And so you create a story with it. And I write the script and all that sort of thing. And it gets sent back to the UK, what's called picture locked. So it's absolutely locked with a script. And then it just gets the final post done in the UK, which is colouring of the images, sound, making sure the sound's perfect throughout it and all those sorts of things. And another actor narrates it. My voice is not right for Rich House Poor House.
So you've gone from filming the animals, a bunch of the quadrupeds, and now you're filming the human animals.
I wouldn't like to put it that way. I'm just filming humans.
Is it way different, or does it fall pretty easily into the skill set you had already?
Well, I think that if you can, the one thing that you must have to be a producer is you must be good at telling stories. You must be able to make a story out of anything. It must have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it must have its ups and downs, and you must keep the viewer watching. And so that's the same in anything, really. Rich House Poor House probably has a stronger script than many do, because it has to be pushed by the script. No, it's all about writing a story. I think it was Alfred Hitchcock said there are 3 things you need to remember when you're making a film. The first is story, the second is story, and the third is story. He was right.
And you have a whole Rich House Poor House franchise going on, apparently. Is this something you feel like you want to? This is kind of like your path forward now? Is like you're going to focus on?
Well, I'm one of the producers on it. It's made by a company called Emporium Productions in London. But yeah, I mean, it got me through COVID. I haven't stopped doing it since COVID. I mean, everybody was out work during COVID. I wasn't. So it's got me all the way through COVID. You may say, how on earth did you film it during COVID? Well, people wore masks. I mean, obviously, the filming went down for sort of around 2 months, but we were able to get back to filming it with masks That was amazing because it meant you could put any words anywhere. You didn't know what they were saying. You could literally put words into the mouths of people. Uh, but in general, we try to be pretty honest making it. In fact, there's no option. It's a story because they start on day 1, they finish on day 7. You have to follow that. You can't muck with that, and you have to discover it. But no, if anyone's ever watched it, find it. It's surprisingly entertaining. My son used to love watching it when he was about 6, 7, or 8, 9, right? So I'd seen it before I worked on it, so that again wasn't an issue for me. And I'd always thought it was a good program. I think it'd been made for about 2 years before I started on it. So yeah, I shall do that until they sack me. My son's 16 now, though, so that thinks that life's getting a bit easier.
And you've always been doing a little bit of the Doctor Who fandom stuff. I mean, you were one of the first people to come over to the U.S. for some of the first Doctor Who conventions out here.
Yeah, well, that was, I think the first Doctor Who convention in England was Longleat, which the BBC organised. And John Nathan Turner was very, very into giving the programme a profile and publicity to attract viewers. And we did get very good viewers when John was producing on it. So it worked. So we did this big thing at Longleat, which thousands and tens of thousands of people turned up to. And the BBC thought a couple of hundred would turn up. It was ridiculous. They had no idea. They had to call in the army as security. All the roads were shut in. It was near Bristol, actually, in the west of England, near Stonehenge. And all the roads were shut. And of course, this meant you couldn't get there. So at the time, I come from a money background. I was living in a little council flat on a very rough estate in South London at the time. I was yet to buy my first house, and it really was rough where I was living. And the BBC said, "We'll send a car to your house, Mark. This is a big black chauffeur-driven car." And I said, "You will not send a chauffeur-driven car anywhere near my house." I said, "I will be on Lambeth Road near the Catholic Cathedral, and that's where you will pick me up." Because if a car like that had come into our estate and I'd got into it, by the time I got back, the door would have been off the flat. There'd been nothing left in it. It was that rough. Different times. London has changed since then. There aren't those areas really left in central London. But yeah, it was in Waterloo near the station.
I meant more like the conventions here in the U.S., but I mean,
yeah, but that was a case. That was a case in point where tens of thousands of people turned up, right? So they'd done this one in Longleat. So John thought, if we want to sell this to the States, wouldn't it be fantastic to have a Doctor Who bus going around the US and visiting all the local channels that we sell it to? And he was absolutely right. It was a fantastic idea. Right? So the Doctor Who bus arrived, right? And we would sell to channels in Kansas City or wherever, Then you do, and then at that point we started doing appearances. Okay, we would leave the rehearsal room on a Friday, get on a plane, go to the States for a weekend, do an appearance, and be back in the rehearsal room in the UK, right? So it was pretty hard work, but it meant you got to visit heaps of American cities. You didn't see much of them, but you got there, you got put in a car, you went down to the local television station, and they said, and you said, if you want to keep watching great channels like Doctor Who on Channel 59 or whatever, then keep sponsoring us, right? So we did that, and then we did appearances, and thousands of people were turning up. And we started getting paid for these appearances. This was a whole new ballgame. And that's when it really all started. And Chicago TARDIS was the first big convention in America, which was obviously in Chicago. I think 3,000 people it was limited to. Sold 3,000 tickets. I went with an actor called Pat Troughton, who played
number 2.
Yeah, number 2. Pat had never been to the States. I had never been to the States before going to that first one in Chicago, and we drove into Chicago in the back of this stretch limousine. We'd never been in a stretch limousine before. You don't get treated like that as an actor in the UK. You come on the bus on the tube. And we looked out the window, and there's this. It's like being in a film. And there's all these wonderful skyscrapers with the chunks cut out of them that they have in Chicago. Extraordinary sight. I think Chicago's a wonderful city. And Pat reached into the inside pocket on his jacket and got out a flask of whiskey. So I think we might need one of these before we get out of the car, Mark. Poured us both a whiskey in the back of this stretch limo. It was right. It was extraordinary. I don't think even the people who organised that event were expecting it to be quite as busy as it was. It was extraordinary. The first thing we had to do was the guy who organised it, a guy called Norman Rubinstein, had priced a signed poster, which would be signed by all the actors to everybody who attended the interview. That was 3,000 autographs we had to do on the first night on these posters. I don't think we got to sleep until 4 a.m. And then we were up early the next morning for the opening of the convention. So yeah, but it was great. And since then, I've had some wonderful times in the States, made some very dear friends, and yeah, it's given me a chance to see the whole of the States.
It is interesting because one of the problems from Doctor Who, especially from the early days, was the BBC, especially, they just thought it was kind of not to put it down as a program, but they kind of felt like this was a disposable format. You know, we're going to do these stories, they're going to be watched now, and they're never going to be seen again. No one's going to care. It's just kind of this wacky sci-fi childhood program we do.
Well, man, it is wacky, and it is amazing it survived. I mean, again, you try going into a commissioning editor's office and say, I've got this great program. It's in an old police telephone box. That's where it's set. First thing the commissioning editor's thinking, well, that dates it immediately, right? And it's about this guy. I think he's going to be an older guy, and he's going to have this young girl traveling with him. Whoa, stop there. They're not having an old guy with this young girl. And he goes around the universe picking up young girls and young boys. You are seriously suggesting we're going to make a television program about that? You wouldn't get anywhere.
That is funny. Considering then, of course, what would happen with Blue Peter and stuff, there's a bit of an ironic thing there, but it has legs. And was it that point when you're doing these conventions, you're like, okay, this is actually big. This is like, this is bigger than I realized. This isn't just the UK. This is just like, people are really into this all over.
Yeah. It does sometimes rebound against you. I went to a convention, funny enough, in Kansas, right? And I went with a lady called Deborah Watling, who was one of Pat Troughton's assistants in the early days of Doctor Who. Very, very glamorous woman. She had a fur coat on. I mean, could have been cold in Kansas. High heels, fur coat, that sort of thing, you know. That's just immaculately. I warned, she'd never been to America before, and I warned her, I told her about Pat and I arriving in Chicago, and I said, so don't be freaked, there'll probably be a stretch limo waiting for us. They treat you like a star in America. Just pretend you're used to it, Deborah, right? So we got off, and it was snowing. She was dressed absolutely appropriately. Got into the back of the powder blue stretch limo with a chauffeur called Frank, and Frank was lovely. He pulled out onto the freeway, and about a kilometer later, he ran out of petrol. We came to a grinding halt on the freeway in the snow. This was in the days before mobile phones. Frank couldn't leave the limo, so about half an hour into America, I was trudging down a snowbound freeway with a petrol can, having to go and get some fuel for the stretch limo. So it's not always the luxury you think it's going to be.
That was a very Turlough moment, if there was one.
Fortunately, I had sensible shoes on. Here's a travel tip for you. I can never believe it when I get on planes, and before takeoff, people take their shoes off. When do planes crash? They crash on takeoff or landing. That terrible accident that's happened in India. When did it happen? Just yesterday. It happened on takeoff, right? I always wear a sturdy pair of boots to fly in, and they are never off for 10 minutes off after we take off. I want to be able to get out of a burning plane if I possibly can. And you see people putting their slippers on and things. It's not going to help them.
That's smart. So you've kind of been around the whole fandom this whole time, and now you've been doing them for a while, but you're doing the Big Finish audios, which is you and with Pete Davison, often Sarah and I'm drawing blank for Tegan.
Janet and Matthew, who played Adric, and all of them anyway. Yeah.
I think that's real interesting that you are still able to go back and now you're playing this character you played in your 20s and you slot right in. It's like it's crazy because for me, it's like his voice hasn't changed at all.
Well, no,
And you're one of the
I do have to try not to do that
okay.
too. I do have to sort of make it a bit younger than normally would, but it's no problem. I mean, Peter, Janet, Sarah, all the whole crowd, we work so well together. We can just slot straight back into it. And obviously, I live in New Zealand. And it sometimes doesn't work that I can get back to the UK, right? So I have done them from New Zealand. And initially, when I did the first one here, they sent me the script, and I was going to record all my lines, right? But I employed some other actors for a morning to be the Doctor and Tegan and whatever and Sarah, and it just didn't work. I could hear Peter's voice in my head. I can hear the other actors' voices, and it was more distracting having the other actors. So what I do now is they send me a script and I record my lines, and then there's a long silence while I'm imagining everything else to happen until my next line. And I just come in with my next line, and that works really well. Yeah, it's and then you do things like you do wild track at the end. You do lots of screams, a few cries out, a few cries of pain, and a bit of running, and a bit of panting, and falling over. Do all that, and they've got that, and they can lay that in as well.
I'm sure that's a lot easier than having to travel all the way back to the UK and then.
It's not, yeah, but it's lovely to do it. It's lovely to meet the crew again, and I mean, I do enjoy acting. I got bored with it, but I do love acting. I love the process of acting. I like being an actor. I like having to imagine something. I like having to imagine emotion and being absorbed into somewhere where you're totally involved in it for that minute. Acting is a bit like yoga. What people try to do with yoga is they try and reach this state of being where they're not within themselves. They've reached total calmness and they're in a different place. Well, when the director says action and you start a scene, that's it. If you aren't in a different place then, if you're at all thinking about your life, it's not going to work. You need to be that character in that place doing that thing until the end of the scene. And that, in fact, I find extremely relaxing. I love acting for that reason. It takes your mind off your worries. Just going to a different place.
Well, I love them. The Turlough audios I always like, okay, I'm going to like this one. So I'll pick it up from Big Finish, enjoy that. Where, what do you have any feelings? Like, where do you think maybe that character go or what might happen to Doctor Who fandom? I mean, there are a lot of questions right now about, and this fits in kind of what we were talking about, where you've watched these different levels of fandom where it was just a TV show and now it has this huge audience, and you were there for the Wilderness Leaders where it shrunk and then got big again. I mean, you've been at all these different stages. What do you think the future is for something like Doctor Who? Because, like here on YouTube, we operate kind of like micro niches, and that's how many fandoms have become. What do you think is going to happen to something like Doctor Who, which usually did better as more of a mass property?
I don't know if anybody could ever predict what's going to happen with Doctor Who. I mean, you can see how John saved it as the series because it was going to be cancelled before Nathan Turner took it over and Peter Davison became the Doctor. He did lots of clever things to save it then. That included bringing Peter Davison in. Peter Davison had been a big star of a series called All Creatures Great and Small about vets. So Peter already had a following, and he brought that family television following in to Doctor Who. Then I mean it's lurched forwards, hasn't it? It lurches from crisis to crisis. I mean, Russell T Davies, I mean, he improved it massively by spending a hell of a lot more money on it, but also taking it in different directions. If you try new things, not all of them are going to work. So that can cause issues. So where will it go to from here? Who knows? It's a survivor, so I hope it survives.
Me too. Do you think it's a money issue? This is something a lot of fans have wondered. Disney had a lot of money. The BBC wanted to put forward a lot of money. The RTD and even Chibnall's time, they look more expensive, but some have made arguments that the constraints of when it was horror forced kind of a level of creativity that really made the show thrive. What do you think about that?
I think they did. I think the less money you've got, the harder you try. I was very lucky, for example, when I was in it, I think the script writing was very, very strong when I was in it. And I think you don't forget what Alfred Hitchcock said, whoever said it, story is what you need. Okay? Effects works to a certain extent with a movie, an action movie, but it doesn't really work for a drama like Doctor Who. It helps enormously, but it doesn't. If you haven't got a strong script, then you're up shit creek without a paddle, as they say. And I do think sometimes that the scripts haven't been very strong. So, but I'm a wise enough producer not to give any other producer any advice. Doctor Who is a big beast to handle. Do I think the BBC would? It still earns a lot of money for the BBC, I would have thought. Unlikely that they'd want to see it go, but you never know.
Happened once before.
Yeah, I can't tell you. I can't tell you. I don't have any insider knowledge, I'm afraid. I really don't.
Do you remember when it was being canceled the first time around? Because those are some cringy days. You know, you watch some of the Save Doctor Who specials with Colin Baker on vocals.
Yeah, well, Michael Grade became controller of BBC One. He didn't like the program. He quite simply did not like Doctor Who, which I can understand. Doctor Who is, as they say, is a bit like Marmite. You know, you either like it or you hate it. And I think that's true of Doctor Who. When I was first on Doctor Who, my parents watched it. And I was expecting them to give me a phone call after the first episode to say, no. So about half an hour after it's aired, I rang my mum and dad and said, Mum answered the phone. I said, Mum, did you watch Doctor Who? She said, oh, yes, we watched it. Not our sort of television. We won't be watching it again, I'm afraid. So there you go. Not their sort of television. And
harsh critic.
Like that. You either love it or you hate it. Now, they had a controller of BBC One who hated it. So it depends who's in charge of the BBC purse strings, whether Doctor Who continues or not.
Yeah. And ironically, those wilderness years actually ended up being quite great creative fuel later on with Big Finish and then RTD when he takes over the show and he had all those writers that had been established in those wilderness years. So
yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it's like that again. I don't know.
Yeah. Who knows?
Who knows? But we are going to get more Turlough, right? There is going to be more Turlough action.
There will be with Big Finish, yeah. You'll get more Turlough with Big Finish. I am supposed to do 4 this year. I think in October at some point, or late September. I'm going to the UK to do them.
Okay, this is a fun final question. You'll like this. Okay, AI. As a TV producer, I'm sure you're aware of AI. The big question is, what happens to franchises like Doctor Who, Star Wars, Star Trek? There have established characters. Would you be like, okay, one day you're like, you sign an agreement with Big Finish, you could use my likeness to make fake AI Turlough to the end of time, or would that be against like?
Or it'd be cheaper to employ me. It won't be cheaper to employ actors than to buy AI these days. I think AI is amazing, right? It's amazing, but what it can't do is tell stories. So you're never going to not have script writers for starters, right? It falls over all the time. It's a very useful tool for authors to use, right? To get them to a certain point, but at a certain point, you need a writer to guide that story and also bring in their own personal experience. You can tell, you know, when you read any great writer, particularly, that it's coming from their heart. It's to do with personal experience. Little things that AI would never ever pick up on, right? It's like if you ask AI what's it like to film crocodiles, they wouldn't come up with the bamboo problem and all that sort of stuff, right? And they wouldn't come up with being in a tent, you know, and having a crocodile on top of you, right? It just wouldn't happen. You've got to have lived the life for that, right? But I don't have a problem using AI images, for example, right? Of humans. I think, yeah, for I can see it in things like soap operas and, as you say, in long running series. I can see its attractions. I've never seen anything by AI that is totally convinced me yet. I think it's got a way to go. So I think we're a few years. Well, I say a few years. I mean, it might be 2 away from that. But I think you'll always need creatives, right? You always need people to come up with an idea in the first place, for example. I mean, if it was as simple as ask AI to write a good television series, write me a good television series. I want it to be set in space. It's going to come up with a load of rubbish. You have to give it guidelines, and quite strict guidelines, if you're going to get the most of what you can out of AI as a creative. And that's how authors are using it now, creative writing or authors. They're giving it strict guidelines to work in, and it helps then. It comes up with ideas. So it's like having a mate, really, sitting there next to you, helping you with the writing. But it can't do it on its own.
That's a good way to put it. I use AI for copy editing all the time. It's a very useful tool that way.
Yeah, it's like having a good assistant, good personal assistant you can bounce things off.
So you wouldn't be terribly offended if after you leave this mortal coil that there are more AI now voiced adventures of Turlough and...
No, I wouldn't. But by the way, once I'd left this mortal coil, if I found alive, can you pay me? I do have a problem, like anybody does who earns their living out of being a creative, about your image or your voice being used for nothing. Yeah, that's an issue.
That is very true. It is not. It's a huge. If you want to be a creative person at all, it's just always a huge fight for money. Just always a huge fight.
I'm not saying. I mean, being creative is fun. It has its plus sides, and it's very rewarding. But at the end of the day, it is a living. We have houses. We have families. We do need money to keep us going. It doesn't happen by magic.
Yeah. Do you think your son wants to follow in your footsteps as a producer or actor or creative?
No, my son will definitely not follow my footsteps as an actor or a creative. He's not. I mean, he's watched some of my Doctor Who's. I think that he didn't watch them for years and years and years. He didn't watch them until he was about 12. He just didn't want to watch them. I think perhaps because I'd given up being an actor, he probably thought I had to give up because I was so bad as an actor. Right? This wasn't the case. So he watched a trilogy of stories, Black Guardian stories, including my first story, and he came in and said, Dad, I've watched 3 of those stories of yours. You're actually quite a good actor. He said, I can see why you did it. Yeah. But he's not at all interested in it. He just thinks it's a bit silly to be an actor. I mean, he likes going to movies and things, but he could never do it. It takes a certain sort of brain to be an actor. You must have no self-respect whatsoever. You must be able to do anything without being embarrassed by it, right? So if in a studio, as happened on one of mine, the production manager drew a chalk circle on the floor of the studio and said, okay, Mark, this is the scene where you're going to be sucked out of the spaceship and you're screaming tractators, 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 which was the monster that time. And I want you foaming at the mouth. John said, yeah, spitting and foaming at the mouth as well, Mark. Okay. Now,
best job ever.
If you do that and take the piss out of it and don't really think, even though you're just in your costume on the floor of a studio with cameras already, if you don't really think you're being sucked out into space and your life is being threatened, you're going to look like shit. You have to be able to go to that place as an actor. And that's not a place that my son wants to go to or could go to. I don't think he's a very different person to me. He's into his volleyball and basketball and things and that sort of thing. He wants to be a real estate agent at the moment. So there you go.
Well, Mark, this was I really enjoyed the conversation. You made me laugh quite a bit. You're a funny guy. Seriously, huge honor. I've been a fan of your work for a long time, and then researching your career since Doctor Who and everything you've done and like documentaries and stuff. Hugely impressive. So it really was an honor to meet with you.
So it was an absolute pleasure. I suppose it's having done Doctor Who conventions for many years now. I can talk till the cows come home. I've got hours of it left.
Maybe it's a redhead thing. I have the same problem. I just talk too much. I guess we'll just wrap it up here. Is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with? Maybe where can they find you? What should they check out?
No. I think the only thing I would say to audience, which will vary from people of my age, which is 66, to much younger people, is for the younger people, when you look at the world today, bear in mind the world that I was brought up in and how life has changed so massively. Because I think it will really affect how you see what we do now. I didn't get a mobile phone until I was 36. I was the first person I knew to get a Mac computer. I was 29. That's how the world has changed. We didn't have a television when I was a young boy. So people ask, did I watch Doctor Who? I watched a few episodes of Pat Troughton. Had to go to a friend's house. So we lived in such a different world. And it does affect the way we see things creatively, I think. Because I think that what younger people would think about AI is perhaps it's going to, take over with everything. And I don't think it is, but maybe I'm fooling myself. I have no idea.
I don't know either.
But that's your next question that you should be asking AI is, will Doctor Who continue, and how can we save it? Put that in AI and see what you get.
Well, hopefully it answers it will, and it won't be very hard, but we'll have to see.
Okay. Well, lovely to do this. Great talking to you.
You too. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to watch CultureScape today. The show wouldn't be possible without the help of my editor, Chris Hollowicki, who makes me look way more competent than I actually am, and, of course, viewers like yourselves. So until next time, friends, keep geeking out. Hey there, gang. If you are a fan of CultureScape, and I know you are, and want to get involved in supporting the show, well, now you can. By joining the CultureScape Patreon, you'll help support me and my editor, Chris, as we create the show and produce more quality journalism. For just $5 or $10 a month, you not only help us, but get access to our exclusive members-only Discord. You'll also get to vote on and suggest new guests for the interview. So if you are a fellow weeb and love CultureScape, then come join us today on Patreon.